Before you even realize it, before you say a word, before you introduce yourself, before you even realize it, your presence is already speaking. Some people feel it immediately. The room shifts, the energy tightens, smiles become forced, silence grows louder. And if you've ever sensed discomfort without doing anything wrong, this is why. Your presence doesn't provoke envy by trying. It reveals it by simply being what others are afraid to become. There is something you may not realize about your presence, but others feel it immediately. You can walk into a room without saying a word and shift the atmosphere. Conversations change, energy tightens. Some people grow quiet, others become overly polite, restless, or strangely distant. This isn't imagination and it isn't arrogance. Your presence makes certain people uncomfortable because it exposes something in them they would rather not face. And once you understand why envious people react this way, you will stop questioning yourself for reactions you never caused. Envious people are not always aware of their envy. Many would never describe themselves as jealous. What they feel instead is discomfort, an internal pressure they can't name. Your presence reflects something back to them: confidence, self-possession, growth, peace, or direction. Even if you are quiet, even if you are kind, something about you highlights a contrast. You represent a version of self they haven't stepped into, and that silent comparison creates tension long before any words are exchanged. This discomfort does not come from anything you do wrong. It comes from what you no longer apologize for. When you are grounded in yourself, you don't seek approval. You don't over-explain. You don't perform insecurity to make others feel safe. That absence of self-doubt can feel threatening to people who rely on external validation or comparison to regulate their sense of worth. Your calm becomes a mirror, and not everyone likes what they see reflected back. Envious people are often unsettled by consistency. You show up as yourself, whether you're praised or ignored. You don't adjust your personality to fit the room. This steadiness removes the usual social cues they depend on: competition and reassurance hierarchy. Without those signals, they feel unbalanced. They don't know where they stand relative to you, and that uncertainty breeds quiet resentment disguised as discomfort. Another reason your presence unsettles envy is that it exposes effort. You may not talk about your discipline, your healing, or your inner work, but it shows. People sense when your confidence is earned rather than performed. For those who avoid self-reflection, this can feel confrontational even when you are silent. You remind them that growth is possible and that possibility carries responsibility they may not want to accept. This is why envious people often react subtly rather than directly. They may become unusually quiet around you, overly agreeable, or strangely distant. Some will smile too much. Others will withdraw their warmth. These reactions are not about you personally. They are attempts to manage internal discomfort without addressing its source. Your presence disrupts their emotional equilibrium simply by being authentic and unforced. One of the strongest traits in your presence that unsettles envious people is your sense of internal stability. You are not easily pulled into chaos, gossip, or emotional reactivity. While others may rely on external stimulation to feel alive or validated, you move with a quieter certainty. This steadiness makes comparison unavoidable. Envious people feel exposed because they sense that your peace is not accidental, it is cultivated, and that realization can feel confronting to those who avoid inner work. Your presence also disrupts environments built on performance. In many social spaces, people unconsciously compete through status, attention, or approval. When you don't play that game, you change the rules without saying a word. You don't chase validation or diminish yourself to belong. This absence of performance creates unease for those who depend on it. They don't know how to position themselves around you because you're not signaling insecurity or submission. Another trigger is clarity. When you know who you are and where you're going, even quietly, it creates contrast. Envious people often feel stuck in cycles of hesitation or self-doubt. Your direction, even when unspoken, highlights their lack of it. This is why your presence may provoke subtle questioning, unnecessary critique, or faint resistance. It is an attempt, often unconscious, to disrupt the certainty they feel in your energy. Envy is also stirred by emotional self-containment. You don't overshare to create connection. You don't seek sympathy to feel close. This restraint can feel intimidating to those who rely on emotional exposure for bonding. Your ability to hold your own emotions without spilling them into the room signals maturity and self-trust. For someone who hasn't developed that capacity, your presence can feel like distance, even though you are not being distant at all. There is also something deeply unsettling about authenticity. When you are aligned with yourself, your behavior is consistent across situations. You don't wear multiple masks. This makes manipulation, comparison, and social maneuvering ineffective. Envious people often feel powerless around authenticity because it cannot be controlled or competed with. They sense that you cannot be easily influenced, and that realization creates quiet insecurity. As envy grows uncomfortable around your presence, it often expresses itself through subtle behavioral shifts. People who once felt relaxed around you may begin acting unusually reserved or overly formal. Their tone changes, their energy feels guarded. This isn't random. Your presence now activates awareness in them, awareness they are not ready to confront. Rather than addressing their feelings, they adjust their behavior to reduce internal friction. One common shift is over-politeness. Envious people may become excessively agreeable, offering praise that feels hollow or timed oddly. This niceness is not warmth, it is control. By keeping interactions surface level and pleasant, they avoid deeper engagement where comparison would feel sharper. The friendliness acts as a buffer, allowing them to remain near you without exposing their discomfort. Another sign appears as withdrawal. They speak less, share less, and gradually remove emotional access. Your presence makes them hyper-aware of what they lack, so distance becomes a form of relief. This withdrawal is often quiet and unannounced, leaving you wondering if you did something wrong. In truth, nothing changed except their internal state when placed beside your steadiness. Some envious people respond with subtle resistance. They may question your decisions more than before, or respond to your ideas with lukewarm enthusiasm. This isn't concern, it's an attempt to rebalance the internal comparison. By minimizing your certainty, they temporarily ease their own discomfort. These small acts are rarely conscious, which makes them harder to confront and easier to dismiss. Envy can also show itself through imitation mixed with tension. They begin adopting aspects of your behavior, speech, or habits, while simultaneously feeling unsettled by you. This creates internal conflict. Admiration pulls them closer, insecurity pushes them away. The result is inconsistent behavior, warm one moment, distant the next, leaving you sensing unpredictability without understanding why. As time passes, the discomfort your presence creates for envious people rarely fades on its own. In fact, it often intensifies. The longer they remain near you, the harder it becomes for them to ignore the contrast between where they are and what your energy represents. Your calm consistency removes excuses, your growth removes denial. And because they have not addressed the root of their envy, the internal pressure builds quietly, seeking an outlet. This is why envious reactions tend to escalate subtly rather than explode. Instead of confrontation, you may notice passive behaviors, missed support, delayed responses, or a sudden lack of enthusiasm for things that once mattered to them. These actions are not calculated attacks. They are coping mechanisms. The person is attempting to reduce their exposure to a presence that continually reminds them of unfinished inner work. Another way this discomfort intensifies is through comparison fatigue. At first, envious people may try to compete silently, measuring themselves against you. But when that comparison becomes too exhausting or painful, frustration sets in. Rather than using it as motivation, they disengage emotionally. This can look like indifference, subtle dismissal, or quiet detachment. What you are witnessing is not superiority. It is surrender masked as disinterest. Your presence also disrupts emotional shortcuts. Some people regulate their self-esteem by staying close to those who mirror their struggles or reinforce familiar narratives. When you evolve beyond those patterns, your presence no longer supports the story they tell themselves. This creates unease. You are no longer confirming their identity, you are challenging it simply by existing differently. It's important to recognize that this intensification is not a sign that you should adjust or retreat. On the contrary, it often signals that you are becoming more aligned with yourself. Growth naturally filters environments. It clarifies who can walk beside you without tension and who relied on shared stagnation to feel comfortable. This process can feel lonely, but it is also deeply protective. When your presence makes envious people uncomfortable, the most important shift happens inside you. Instead of questioning your tone, your energy, or your intentions, you begin to question the environment. You recognize that discomfort is not always a signal of wrongdoing. Sometimes it is a signal of misalignment. This realization frees you from the exhausting habit of self-monitoring. You stop shrinking your presence to ease reactions that were never yours to manage. One of the earliest internal changes is learning to trust how your body responds around certain people. You notice who leaves you feeling steady and who leaves you feeling tense or drained. This awareness is subtle but powerful. It allows you to read situations without overanalyzing words or behavior. Your nervous system becomes a guide, helping you distinguish between genuine connection and proximity rooted in comparison. As this awareness deepens, you stop explaining yourself unnecessarily. You no longer feel compelled to justify your confidence, your boundaries, or your direction. Silence becomes comfortable rather than awkward. This can unsettle envious people further because they are accustomed to extracting reassurance or self-doubt from others. When you don't offer it, the dynamic shifts. You reclaim energy that was previously being spent on emotional negotiation. Another internal shift is releasing responsibility for how others interpret you. Envious discomfort often tempts people to soften themselves, to appear less capable or less certain in order to preserve harmony. But harmony built on self-reduction is fragile. When you choose self-respect instead, you create a different kind of peace, one that does not depend on approval or emotional accessibility. You may also notice a growing sense of emotional neutrality. Situations that once felt tense no longer trigger the same reaction. You observe rather than absorb. You respond rather than react. The neutrality is not detachment or coldness. It is clarity. It allows you to remain present without being pulled into dynamics rooted in insecurity or silent competition. As your awareness strengthens, creating space no longer feels dramatic or defensive. It happens naturally. You stop forcing closeness where tension quietly exists. You allow conversations to remain light when depth feels unsafe. This distance is not punishment, it is alignment. You are simply honoring the truth that not everyone can remain comfortable as you become more yourself. Envious people often interpret space as rejection, but that interpretation belongs to them. What you are actually doing is conserving energy. You recognize that proximity without harmony requires effort, and effort without growth leads to depletion. By stepping back emotionally, you protect your momentum. You allow your presence to remain intact instead of fragmented by constant self-adjustment. This shift can feel unfamiliar at first, especially if you were once the one who bridged gaps, smoothed tension, or carried emotional weight for others. But as you release that role, you notice how much lighter interactions become. You no longer feel responsible for regulating the emotional climate. You show up as you are, and that is enough. Space also brings clarity. When you stop offering constant access, patterns become obvious. Those who value you for who you are adapt with ease. Those who relied on comparison or emotional proximity struggle. Their discomfort becomes visible, not because you changed, but because the dynamic did. This clarity removes confusion and replaces it with calm understanding. Importantly, space does not mean isolation. It means selective connection. You invest where energy flows naturally and withdraw where resistance persists. This discernment sharpens your intuition and strengthens your sense of self. You begin to recognize that peace is not found by being everywhere. It is found by being where you are aligned. As your growth continues, relationships begin to reorganize themselves without force or explanation. Some people drift naturally to the edges of your life, not because of conflict, but because resonance has changed. Where there was once ease, there is now tension. Where there was familiarity, there is now distance. This shift can feel uncomfortable at first, but it is also deeply honest. Your presence no longer fits into spaces built on comparison, shared limitation, or unspoken competition. Envious people often struggle most during this phase because your evolution removes the role they unconsciously assigned you. Perhaps you were the one who made them feel superior, safe, or validated. Perhaps your uncertainty once mirrored their own. As you step into clarity, that unspoken agreement dissolves. They may feel unsettled, left behind, or quietly displaced, not because you abandoned them, but because you stopped shrinking to maintain balance. This is why fewer connections often accompany deeper alignment. Quantity decreases as quality sharpens. You no longer feel drawn to conversations that revolve around stagnation, complaint, or subtle rivalry. Your energy seeks spaces where growth is mutual and support feels clean. This refinement is not loss, it is direction. It signals that your inner world is becoming more intentional. Envious discomfort may still surface from time to time, but it no longer holds the same weight. You recognize it quickly and respond without emotional charge. There is no need to defend, explain, or retreat. You remain steady. This steadiness communicates something powerful. You are no longer available for dynamics that require you to doubt yourself in order to be accepted. At this stage, your presence becomes a quiet filter. Those who are aligned feel drawn in effortlessly. Those who are not feel uncomfortable without knowing why. You don't need to announce boundaries or make declarations. Your consistency does the work for you. You move forward without resistance because you are no longer carrying emotional weight that doesn't belong to you. The most meaningful realization is this: your presence was never meant to be comfortable for everyone. It was meant to be true. And truth has a way of unsettling what cannot grow with it. When you finally understand that your presence makes envious people uncomfortable, a deep sense of peace settles in. You stop misinterpreting tension as failure. You stop assuming that every shift in energy requires self-correction. Instead, you recognize that discomfort often arises when truth enters a space that was built on avoidance. Your presence carries honesty, and honesty disrupts illusions without effort. You no longer feel the need to soften yourself to preserve comfort. Your confidence becomes calm rather than defensive. You allow silence without filling it. You allow distance without guilt. This self-trust changes how you move through the world. You are no longer scanning rooms for approval or safety. You are grounded within yourself, and that grounding becomes your anchor. Envy loses its influence when it no longer affects your sense of worth. You don't personalize reactions that were never about you. You understand that some people are uncomfortable not because you are intimidating, but because you are no longer participating in shared insecurity. Your growth quietly rewrites the emotional contract, and not everyone is ready to sign the new terms. From this place, your presence becomes lighter, freer, and more intentional. You invest energy where it is returned cleanly. You stop forcing alignment. You stop explaining your evolution to those committed to misunderstanding it. This is not emotional withdrawal, it is emotional maturity. You are choosing clarity over chaos, alignment over attachment. The most powerful outcome is internal. You become comfortable being misunderstood by those who cannot meet you where you are. You no longer chase closeness at the cost of authenticity. Your peace deepens because it is no longer dependent on harmony with everyone, only with yourself. In the end, your presence was never meant to blend in. It was meant to illuminate. Some will feel inspired, others will feel exposed. Both reactions are natural. What matters is that you continue forward without shrinking, without apologizing, and without carrying emotions that do not belong to you. When you honor who you are becoming, your presence stops asking for space. It creates it.